Working with surfaces, profile and path curves. Hello there. In the previous few lessons, we were discussing about NURBS curves, and I mentioned at the end of the lesson that NURBS curves won't render in our scene. It might be sort of a shock for us since we invested a huge amount of time and energy on learning curves, but it's not so. Actually, curves have more than a use. In this tutorial, we're going to learn about the ways of manipulating curves to form mesh, which is nothing but the surfaces. Now, with that intro, let's move on into our lesson. As I mentioned, we're going to create surfaces from curves. But I would like to remind you that before moving on to this lesson, in the Introduction to NURBS object tutorial, I mentioned that a curve has only U parameter, and a NURBS surface, which is also made of curves, has two parameters, namely U and V parameter. It's nothing but if U parameter containing curve controls the width of the NURBS surface, then the V parameter containing curve controls the width of the object. Just as simple as that. Thus, for a surface to appear, we need two parametric curves. Thus, we have two types of curves depending on which parameter of the object it controls. Now, we don't need names for them, do we? Well, yes, they are termed as profile curves and path curves. But which one controls what? Well, I'll tell you. Profile curves determine the cross-sectional shape of an object, which is nothing but the width or breadth of an object, and the path curves are solely responsible for the path of extrusion, which is nothing but the length of our surface. Thus, whatever surface we are to create from curves, we're going to create them either from path curve or from the profile curve. Now, if you still have a problem understanding these type curves, don't worry, you will as we move through this lesson. Now, we're going to extrude a curve. All right, what's that? Well, so the command itself is termed as extrude, and what it does, it's going to extrude a surface, a profile curve. But we don't need the direction for an extrude. Yes, it's done with the help of a path curve. We'll move right ahead into the scene and finish her off. Now, we have a scene open here in Maya. Go to the Curves option in the Shelf tab and click once over this icon to create a curve. Now we have the curve at the center of the scene. Let's take it as the profile curve, which is going to control the cross-section of our shape. But we need the path for the extrusion, right? Yes, now we'll go ahead and create the path. Outside the path curve for the extrusion of this profile curve we have here. Now in the same Curves tab, we have this Edit Point Curve Tool icon. If we just go ahead and double-click over that, we'll get the Toolbox option over here. Go ahead and reset the toolbox. Now, don't hesitate to reset any tool before using them. Now, go to the side view of the viewport and create a curve in this direction from the center. Go ahead and place the vertices to create the curve. Once finished, go to the perspective view and select this profile curve at the center first. And now shift-select the path curve, then go to Surfaces menu and over here, open up the option box for Extrude and reset the settings once. With the default settings left behind, click Extrude once. Well, we had extruded this profile curve along this path curve. If we just go ahead and translate these curves, what's that we can actually control the shape of the extrusion. We can also go to the component mode and orient the points so as to orient the shapes. Now, if I go ahead and select the surface and to the input option in the channel box, we have an isolated option named Extrude 1. If I just bring down the scale option, watch that I can actually taper the surface, and over here we can rotate it, so forth and so on. We can't look at all the options over here. It's up to you to go and manipulate the surface using these options. Actually, we have this profile curve, and we extruded this along the path curve. But who made them so? Well, actually we can invert the extrusion by making this the profile curve, and this the path curve. Now, weren't expecting that one, were you? Well, go ahead and explore it out yourself. Now, I'll give you a hint to do that. The first selected curve will act as the profile curve. Now, go ahead and invert the curve selection and extrude, and then observe what you get in your scene. With that, we'll stop extruding, and in the coming lessons, we'll look at other ways of bringing surface objects from curves. Revolving surfaces. In the previous tutorial, we had a look at the types of curves that are used for the extrusion of an object, and we also extruded a profile curve along the path curve using the extrude option. Here in this tutorial, we'll go ahead and look at the other ways of creating surfaces from curves. Now, first off, we're going to see the surface revolve option. Now, what is all this about? Well, what it does is it creates a surface from a curve by sweeping around the starting point and the end point of the curve. Kind of unclear, isn't it? Well, let's work it out and make it a little clearer for you. Here we have a scene open in Maya. Now go to the front view and evoke the Edit Point Curve tool from the shelf. Go ahead and create a curve in this view as I am doing. While placing the points, make sure not to place the curve at anywhere in the opposite axis. I'll tell you what in creating the curve like this as we move through the lesson. Now go to the perspective view, and what we're going to do is create a surface by sweeping the curve starting from here and finishing at the other end of the curve by means of the revolve option. Interested? Great, let's see how it works. Now with the curve selected, go to the Surfaces menu and open up the Revolve option box. Here we'll look into some of the important options. Now before that, yes, go ahead and reset the tool and click Apply. Watch what we get in the viewport. We've got kind of a dome thing going here, don't we? Well, just go ahead and select the curve. If you can't select the curve from the interface, go to the Outliner perspective window. Now here in the Outliner, we have the curve here which we're going to use to create a revolved surface. We can select the curve from here. With the curve selected, if I hit F9 on my keyboard, I can actually go to the Control Vertex mode of the curve. And if I select any of the points and just translate them, see that I can actually change the shape of the surface. But we don't know how the surface was created. Well, what we have done to the curve is, by mentioning the axis to y-axis, we revolve this curve in a y direction to create a surface. It's all in your hands to go ahead and try the revolve in another axis. Here over in the Pivot option, we have Object selected. Actually, the surface width is controlled by the curve's pivot, which is at the center of the surface. Thus, the distance between the pivot and our curve is the width of the surface revolved. That's why we created the curve without moving on to the other axis, with the pivot being at the center. If we would have placed any point on our curve beyond the opposite axis, it would have affected our geometry. For example, if I just drag this control vertex to the opposite axis, watch here that the curve portion that transfers to the other axis makes the surface twine and creates a clustered appearance of surface, which we don't want at any point in time, since it might create a problem when we texture them. Thus, by default, the pivot will be at the center of any axis, and hence we created the curve without crossing the other axis or the pivot. We can also orient the pivot's direction by this option and manipulate the shape of the surface, which I ask you to go ahead and experiment with on your own. Now, if I select the surface from the Object mode and hit Delete once on my keyboard to delete the surface, go ahead and reduce the End Sweep Angle option a little bit. If I select the curve again and hit Apply, just toggle the view. Watch that the sweep hasn't completed the 360 degrees. It ends prematurely at this point that we mentioned. Thus, we can create the surface for the angle we prefer, and over here we can specify the divisions with which we are going to create the surface. With that, we come to the end of this tutorial. In our next lesson, we're going ahead to other possible ways that we can create surfaces from curves. So, on we go. Filling boundary curves with surfaces. In the previous tutorial, we had a brief look at the way of revolving surfaces. Here in this tutorial, we'll look at more options that we have for creating surfaces, of course, from curves. Alright, in this tutorial, we're going to take a look at creating surfaces within a boundary curve. Well, first off, what's a boundary curve? These are nothing but the curves that intersect. And then how to create intersected curves? Well, let's go ahead into our scene and find out how. Here, we're going to create 4 individual curves that are going to intersect with one another. Now, evoke the EV tool once from the shelf and draw the first curve as such. Now, hit Enter to come out of the creation. Hit Y once from your keyboard. Once you get that tool revoked again, as we said earlier, we have to create the second curve in a way that should intersect with the first. Now, over here in the shelf, click this icon, which has curve beneath the magnet shape. If I click and drag the cursor over this curve, watch what happens. We're able to place the first point of the second curve along any region of the first curve. Now, if I go ahead and place the further vertices and hit enter to come out of the second curve creation. Now, evoke the curve tool one more time by hitting Y from your keyboard. Now we'll snap the third curve that we are going to create to the second curve. Now let's uncheck the Snap to Curves icon. Now, why am I doing that? I'll show you a simple way of snapping curves from our keyboard. Now click and hold C on your keyboard. As you click and hold, watch the same snap icon gets highlighted here in the shelf. If I let down the C key, the snap icon gets unselected. Thus, now you can click and hold C on your keyboard, and if you click and drag the second curve, I actually can place the first point of the third curve anywhere in this second curve. Now, go ahead and place vertices and finish the third curve. In the same way, create the fourth curve, but make sure that the endpoint of the fourth curve is placed over the first curve. Now select all four curves and go to the Surfaces menu and open up the Planar option box. Go ahead and reset the settings and click Planar Trim and watch what happens. We're able to create surfaces within the boundary of these curves. Thus, these are the ways of creating boundary curves and the ways of filling them with surfaces. Similarly, there are various options in the Surfaces menu. If I go and tear off the Surfaces menus, over here the boundary square options are more or less similar to what we have seen now, in that the by rail option over here, in that we have three subdivisions. What this first option, by rail 1 tool, does is create surfaces between two profile curves and a single path curve. The second option creates surfaces between two profile curves and two path curves. And the last of them all creates surfaces between two profiles and 3 or more path curves. Now, as a hint here for you to go and practice on those. As a matter of time factor, I would ask you to go ahead and explore all these options that we've seen and those that we have not seen. Since Maya won't fit in anyone's hand with that much ease, we can't learn them all here, unfortunately. With that, we'll finish this tutorial, and onward we will go to finish ways of manipulating curves to bring in surfaces in our next lesson. All about NURBS Surfaces. Hello all, we're making some great progress here in Maya, and hopefully our confidence is building on and on as we move our way onto some powerful modeling tools. Now, we only are a few steps away from conquering the specialization of modeling. In the previous few tutorials, we worked over curves and the ways of manipulating them to surfaces. Now we'll go ahead and finish off NURBS Surfaces modeling in the coming lessons. Alright, here in this tutorial, we're going to discuss all about the making of NURBS surfaces, which are nothing but their components. Okay, in the previous few lessons, we created surfaces from curves. Now, apart from that, I hope that you know that we can create surfaces from the Create menu, and in the NURBS Primitive option. And also from the shelf in this Surface tab over here. Now, let's click this sphere icon to create a NURBS primitive. Now, if I just right-click over the object to get to the marking menus for the NURBS object, over here at the top we got a few options, and these options go to the component mode of the object. Now, if I drop the cursor over the control vertex, watch that we get red-colored dots all over the object, similar to the control vertex of the curves. If you watch further closely, you can see these dots have been placed at a distance from the object. Now, if you remember, I clearly defined that NURBS surfaces are made of curves. And here the control vertices are placed at a distance very, very similar to the control vertices of curves. And why shouldn't it be? Yes, of course, it's made of curves. If I just select any of these vertices and transform them, watch, I can transform the shape of this object. But in fact, we are transforming this curve through these vertices, which in turn transforms the object. These divisions that are connected to vertices are termed isopalms. Now, if I just right-click over the object and select Isopalm, I can select the divisions in this object, which are nothing but isopalms. Now, similar to polygons, where 4 edges connect to form the face of a polygon, here these isopalms connect to form a surface patch. If I just right-click over the object and choose Surface Patch from the options, watch that I can select the patches almost similar to the polygon faces. Now, if you go ahead and select the patches, or for that matter the isopalms, and hit W, watch, we aren't able to get the Translate gizmo. This is because they are oriented by seams and spans, and we can't rearrange them as such, as we do in polygons. Now, if I just right-click and go to the hull mode and select any of these vertical lines, see that I can select all the vertices of that vertical curve. Now, if I select any horizontal curve, I can select the horizontal loop of vertices in that curve. Now, go ahead and transform the hull to transform the entire loop of curves, which in turn will influence the object. Now, if I right-click over the object, we have two components left undiscussed, the surface point and surface UV. The surface UV we'll discuss in the texturing chapter, and the surface point in the coming lessons. But what about the seams and spans in this NURBS surface? We aren't able to view the seams in the surface, are we? This will clear up in the next lesson, and with that, we wrap up this one.